Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition, and I welcome you back. It's good to see you all coming in person again. We didn't hand out an agenda today when you came in. Hopefully you all got the member annual report, and real brief agenda. We're going to talk about our new member dues policy related to fallow, talk about the nitrate control program that you all are participating in, and give you some of the new information that's coming out on that. Then Melissa Turner from MLJ Environmental will be talking about the surface and groundwater program and what we're finding in our local creeks and waterways, and then also about the groundwater trend monitoring. Many of you remember Mike Johnson. He has retired from MLJ, so he has handed over the steering wheel to Melissa and our partner Robert, and they're continuing their work with our coalition and several of the other groundwater coalitions in the Central Valley. So she'll be talking about the groundwater and surface water. And then Katie Diemel, who will give you an update on the membership packet, the materials you got, and also talk a little bit more about our portal. So the positions are our staff right now are myself as Executive Director. Wayne Zipser, who's around today, is Grower Relations. Wayne also retired from Farm Bureau and has come back to work for the ESJ Coalition, working on member outreach and member meetings. And then Katie's at Farm Bureau took Wayne's position at the Farm Bureau as Executive Director. And then Melissa Turner, as I mentioned earlier, is with MLJ Environmental. And I'll mention at the beginning, because I'll mention it throughout the meeting, that this is probably my last series of grower meetings. I too have resigned this account. I'm not retiring, but I am resigning Executive Director. I will be continuing to work with the Board of Directors on various projects, but it's time for the new generation to come in. This is not blonde hair, as some of you out there can identify with, but it's time to let the young generation move in here and take over the reins of this organization. So we're going on 20 years ago. I know many of you were there in 2003 and 4. I recognize you walking around in the audience. We started this organization then, and I had somebody I was talking to yesterday, a grower, that they ought to dissolve all the water coalitions. Why do we have another entity that's managing a regulation? And I reminded him that 20 years ago, before the coalition started, the ag commissioners were thinking about taking this program on. And now you see what we're doing 20 years later. We saw at that time, we didn't want the ag commissioners handling our APNs, our acreage, and our production practices. So I disagreed with this grower that no, in fact, the coalitions have been a better way to do the irrigated lands program and working with the regional water board. So our acreage has changed a bit, but not substantially. As you can see here, we're down about 16,000 acres since the peak year in 2017, in part because growers that are in the dairy industry have the ability to move acreage over into their dairy permit. Some have done that, and some ground has gone out of production. Now, one thing that we'll talk about later is we have a really big concern about fallowing. I mean, not so much this winter now that we got the snowpack, but in the future, this fallowing could have a significant impact on our membership. We've had estimates of 100 to 200,000 acres that could go out of production if there's no water available. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. We've not seen that yet, but our board of directors is anticipating that's going to be an issue. So before I get in all the regulatory stuff, I've got to bring some good news to this meeting. And so I went to the website to look at the reservoir levels that we've got here locally, and we're in fabulous shape. I mean, you all have seen the snow, felt the storms and such. You look at where that circle is, New Melones is 42% of capacity. Just talking to Mike Nemi, Turlock Irrigation. And there is 130% of snow left up in the mountains to melt into that reservoir. So there's well over 100% of your capacity. Don Pedro is 74% of capacity right now. That's 104% of what it normally is. And then McClure down on Merced River, 62%, but that's 128% of capacity. So that's great news. I mean, for this year and probably a couple years ahead, and we're not finished yet. As you all have seen, probably the long range or medium range as more storms are anticipated in the area in the next weeks to months. Other good news. So when we had this new fertilizer regulation adopted in 2012, the activists hated it. They did not want us to have anonymous reporting of our fertilizer information. The other thing that they didn't like is that the water board didn't mandate thou shalt do this when you farm. Because the water board, as much as what people say, they realize agriculture is not the type of industry that can run by one rule. This is what everybody does. So they filed a lawsuit. It's taken years to finally make its way to the state superior court. They went to the state board. State board said, no, it's fine. So their next step for filing is to go to the state courts. The state court finally had their oral arguments on the 24th of January. And believe it or not, we in the state board are on the same side. The activists are on the other side. So the arguments that were made, apparently it looks like the court's leaning in our favor. And they based that on their positions, and their questions were more favorable to us than they were to the environmental justice or the activist community. So nobody knows what the judge will do. We thought we'd have an answer today, but they have a deadline of a couple weeks to get that decision made. But the good news is that there's a very good chance that this is not going to go through. We're going to be able to maintain our anonymous reporting for fertilizer, which is a huge thing. We don't want folks having our names, our grower names, and their information on the fertilizer applied. We submitted under anonymous identifier number. So we were sharing the cost for this litigation. It wasn't cheap with all the other Central Valley coalitions because it would have affected them. East San Joaquin got filed first because we were the first order to be passed in 2012. The other thing that we heard, we had this process called CV Salts, been going on for 15 years. We have monthly meetings, regional board staff is there, executive officer was there, and he made a statement. I about fell out of my chair, and it was in context, a long conversation. He said, well, I think irrigated agriculture, we have enough programs with them. I don't foresee any more programs being put on irrigated agriculture. It's like, what? Say that again and turn on the tape. And he actually said it, and he repeated it. Now, the downside, if you can read all this, we got enough. We're doing enough. I don't know what else they could possibly do, but leave that to somebody in Sacramento to think of. But the executive officer, who has a big sway on the board, is saying what we have now is all that we're gonna have as far as programs. There are some things that need to be implemented in the existing programs, but generally, the fertilizer reporting, the farm plan, sediment erosion, that's all that's going to be required on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis for growers. And then, of course, being in the coalition, some have tried to do the individual order. Doesn't take them long before they come back and say, never mind, we want to be in the coalition, just because the cost of going individual is just enormous. So the other thing is that East San Joaquin, all you growers have been doing great with the reporting requirements, and we all appreciate that on this side, because if it weren't these high numbers for the farm evaluation and the INMP, we would have more difficult, stringent follow-up, even possible fines for not turning in reports, which is crazy because there's still people that aren't even members out there. But the point being is we've been doing well. That just keeps the regional board off our backs and allows us to continue farming and hopefully solve problems that are identified through all the work that we're doing. All right, so then 2023, you've all got your invoice. You could see that our fees are the same as the past 3 years, $5.50 an acre, $50 flat rate. We continue to look for ways that we can save money. We're having conversations with the regional board staff now on some possible other ways that we could save some of the funding or the programs that we're having to implement. We understand, and they understand, agriculture's in a tough position right now, and we're doing our best as a board of directors and staff to keep those costs, the compliance cost, at a steady rate or lower rate if we can swing it. One of the things that have saved us a lot of money already is this portal. We've got a website portal you can go to and fill out all the paperwork. That saves a tremendous amount of work. and I see my fellow graybeards out in the audience. We don't like web portals. I get my 25-year-old to go out and fill all my stuff out. So anyway, really figure out a way to get your grandsons or sons or others to do that work, because it really does save us a lot of money to not have to go to the post office and mail these things out. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, especially the printing cost. And then the thing that we don't have control over is what the State Water Board charges as acreage fees. Now, this is charged to all the irrigated lands programs throughout the state of California. From Imperial Valley to Napa, Sonoma, all those areas are getting a charge of $1.30 for an acre to pay for the program in the Sacramento, or in the Regional Water Board offices. So that is about a 20% of our budget right now is to pay that bill. And we've got almost 700,000 acres. So you can see we send about an $800,000 check to the State Water Board every year. One thing that's in your book that we started doing this year is on page 7, is gives you a breakdown of what our fees are going towards, what your acreage fees are going toward. So you'll see in that first column what all the growers are being charged and what the breakdown is for each of those major areas. So we do have a new policy, though, dues policy, or fees policy that started discussion last summer with this anticipation. Last summer, as we all did, we thought we were in another year of drought. We could lose tremendous number of acres. So our budget planning process led us to come up with a new approach that will keep us doing the regulatory requirements ahead of time, and not finding out the last minute that we didn't collect enough dues and then have to go back and do a supplemental invoice, which we will not do. So I'll try to be real simple on the way this works. So we're off to the left of this calendar. Come May 1, if you have any changes in your acreage this year following anything sold the acreage or whatever, let us know by June 1. We are going to send you a form May 1, and when you get that form, fill it out. If there's any changes, it'll be pre-populated with everything that's on your invoice now, and make those changes, get it to us by June 1. Because by July 1 of this summer, we have to submit our acreage to the Regional Water Board, State Water Board, and they invoice us then. We just got our invoice just now for last year. So we will turn in the acreage that you give us on June 1st. And then our board will meet in September. We'll have that acreage. We'll take our invoice, our budget, and what we have to spend for groundwater, surface water, everything that we do, and then we divide that amongst the number of acres that we report to the regional board in July. You used to be able to scratch out on your invoice and say, I fallowed in 23. We're eliminating that process, because what that'll do, we set our budget and we lose a bunch of acreage over the winter, we can't adjust for it. So if there's any questions about that, well, here, let me one more slide here. So the main reason is that we want to be able to create this budget accurately every year and not go back to the drawing board. That is the worst thing you can do with 3,000 growers. The other thing is that we have that state fee that doesn't change. It hasn't gone down yet. I kind of doubt that it will. If it stays stable, that's better than not going up. But anyway, we have that huge invoice we've got to pay about now that for money we collected last year. And then that it keeps us in a good situation to plan if suddenly this snow stops and we go into long-term drought and we start losing hundreds of thousands of acres. That would be difficult to budget around. All right, so the membership update form I mentioned is coming on May 1st. So again, fill out, make any changes to what is filled out, already populated on that form, scratch it out, add, subtract, if you sell, if you followed this year for some reason, make that changes there. And then that form is due back June 1. That gives us about 30 days to prepare that list that we then send to the water board in July. So make all your corrections for this year in that form that you send us on June 1st. All right, now I'm going to move into the other program that's fairly new. It started right before COVID started, so we didn't have a lot of chance to talk to you in person about this. But I guess the bottom line that you all saw in the Modesto Turlock and Chowchilla basins was a supplemental invoice to pay for the nitrate control program. And I'll explain in a minute what that is. First year, it was a supplemental invoice, came separately. Then last year, it was a supplemental. This year, it was included on the dues that you got if you're in the Modesto and Turlock Basin. The Chowchilla growers in the Chowchilla Basin are going to be getting their invoice shortly. There was a delay in setting up the budget down there, so they are sending out separate invoices for that, and it's based on where that parcel is located. So if you've got parcels in the Modesto Basin and Turlock Basin, and those are the groundwater basins, it's not because it's City of Modesto, it's what Department of Water Resources named the basins. So it's Sierra to the river to the rivers. So the Modesto Basin and Turlock Basin are the ones that were included in your invoice. And if you, again, go back to page 7, you can see the breakdown of the dues, supplemental dues that come into each of these basins. It's on the bottom 2 lines. This year it was $2.10 extra. For the Turlock Basin, $2.10. For Turlock, $2.09, I mean. And then for Chowchilla, it was $4.80. Theirs is larger because they have far fewer acres to divide the cost amongst. So I'm going to just briefly talk about this. It is also in your annual report, but just to give you a verbal on this. So there was a process called CV Salts that came up with a nitrate control program. This involves all the industries that have nitrate discharges. I'll get to that in a minute. There was a big data study done of all the groundwater basins, and they analyzed the nitrate content of these basins and came up with the worst of the worst. Unfortunately, Modesto, Turlock, and Chowchilla are 3 of the worst areas. Kings, Cahuilla, and Tule are the other basins. That's all south of Fresno. And so we have a program. We're in the priority 1. The priority 2 basins I'll talk about in a minute. But the goal of this program is to fulfill the requirements of the nitrate control program. And this program impacts irrigated ag, dairy, poultry, food processors and wineries, and cities. We all have it one way or the other, a discharge to land that has nitrate in it. Wastewater treatment plants, pretty easy to figure out where that nitrate comes from, people. For us, it's fertilizer, dairy, it's animal waste, poultry, the same. Food processors, wineries, there's a little bit of discharge that has nitrate in it, and then the cities. Okay, so on our priority 1 basins, Modesto and Turlock, an organization was started similar to East San Joaquin called Valley Water Collaborative. And this entity has irrigated ag, dairies, and all the industries you saw paying into this program because they're under the same restriction and requirement. So we formed this nonprofit. Part of the reason that I'm stepping down from this position is I'm executive director of this group, because I really feel this is important for agriculture, for this program to be successful. Not that I'm going to be the one to make it successful, but I have 20 years working on this, and I think this is something that we would really, as ag and everyone, need to pay attention to. So what this group does, it's a nonprofit group. It represents multiple basins. Right now, it's Modesto, Turlock. Merced is going to be added shortly. They're going to join, and there's other surrounding basins that will possibly join. And the idea being economies of scale. Y'all get that. You got a 700 horsepower tractor. You don't have a 20-acre parcel. You got a lot of acres to spread that cost over. Management of these organizations is a definite cost, and we might as well spread that, as we did in the East San Joaquin, amongst a broader area. And fulfilling the regulations can be done in that way because they're not really unique based on the basin you are in when you get down to it. So the board of directors is made up. We have 12 board of directors, 3 irrigated agriculture seats on the board. We've got 3 in the food processing winery industry, 2 in dairy, 1 in poultry, and 3 board seats from the cities. And all the cities, municipalities in this region are participating in this group except Turlock, and they are trying to get a different approach because of the wastewater treatment facility they have is pretty cutting edge technology, and they claim that they're not contributing to the nitrate issue any longer. So we'll see. That's not yet been decided. So what we do with the budget, it's a little over $1 million, is we came up with a subjective way to figure out how to pay for this $1 million budget. So irrigated agriculture is about 55%, dairy is 27%. We're 250,000 acres of irrigated cropland in Modesto and Turlock. The dairies are 27%, and then the cities, poultry, and food processors split up the remaining 20%. So this is a subjective, we had to start somewhere, approach to figure out how to split this cost. That 55% equals the $2 an acre plus that you all that were added to your dues. So our contribution to this program comes out of our $2 in the subjective approach. Now, what's happening this year is there's going to be a scientific analytical process done to see what is the actual contribution of nitrate to groundwater by each of these industry segments. It's a very difficult process. It's very novel as far as how to figure out across a huge region, how much does ag contribute, how much does dairy, cities, et cetera. So this may change. I'm not sure. That's what they call an objective approach, using data. Again, the subjective was, we got to get going. What's our estimated contribution in each area? And we came up with these percentages amongst all these industries. In particular, dairy and irrigated ag, because we are the largest footprint in the region. So far, one of the main things that we have to do with this money is we've got to test domestic wells that are not in the irrigated lands program. And if somebody that has a half-acre property or somewhere out of the city has nitrate, we have to provide them free drinking water, free bottled water, possibly in the future, reverse osmosis. Why are we doing that? So when this basin plan was adopted, the regional board said, we will give you a 30-year extension on meeting the 10 milligrams per liter from your discharges into groundwater. Right now, irrigated ag and dairy are not meeting that standard. We had a deadline of, I believe it was 2025, 2 years to make sure all of our fertilizer we applied was not in excess of what the crop needed. Some growers are doing that, but we do not have the technology right now to do that. So in order to get an extension of that deadline, we had to give big. All the dischargers are in the same situation. They cannot stop discharging nitrate immediately. It put us all out of business. It put wineries, everybody else out of business too. So the regional board realized that in exchange for getting 30 more years to meet these standards, they gave us, we had to take the option of giving people whose wells are impacted with nitrate free water, because of all of our combined discharges over 100 years have made these groundwater basins what they are now. It seems like a raw deal, but we had no way we could meet this standard in 3 to 4 years. So it was kind of a rough deal. So Valley Water started promoting this free well testing 2 years ago now. Will be 2 years in May. We've had 900 applications. We're currently have water to about 460 households throughout the Modesto and Turlock Basin. And we're just starting to go into the reverse osmosis treatment systems. So we have a database where we make sure that people are in the basin, that they're not in a city, and we've got a way to track pretty accurately that they're eligible to be in the program. One thing that we did to try to lower the cost is we went to the State Water Board and got a $5.5 million grant. In part, the state came to us because they wanted to have other contaminants monitored for arsenic, uranium, and some of these other things. And we said, that's not our deal. We didn't cause that. We don't want anything to do with it. So they came in and said, we'll give you money to add those to your sampling list. They pay for the extra analytical. You know, nitrates maybe $30 a sample. Those other analytes could be $200 to $300 per well to sample for. So they're paying total full boat for that. And they're splitting the outreach costs for us. So all the mailings, all the things we do to get people, they're paying half of that for being able to have us do that. And then all the other management zones south of us are in the process of doing the same thing. Valley Water was one of the first to get it. So I mentioned priority 2. So when they started out the program, they went for the worst first, And the worst first in our area was Modesto Turlock. Now priority 2 starts kicking in. So the Merced Basin from the Merced River down to the Chowchilla River will be starting the same program at the end of this year. So they'll have to go through the same thing. There'll be supplemental dues down there to pay for the program, as well as Madera. And then the other thing, real quick before I switch over to surface water, I want to talk about our figuring out, understanding what's our contribution, what's our impact to groundwater. How do we even start on that? So there's several ways we're doing that. That's through these nitrogen reporting and the crop nitrogen coefficients that we'll talk about in a minute. We're getting familiar with those. Trying to figure out how effective these practices are at reducing leaching. And then we have a trend monitoring network. We've got a series of wells throughout the region, all the way through the Central Valley, where we're watching, taking samples once a year to see where's these levels going. Are the nitrates going up? Are they going down? And so we had to do that. And then there's another process I'm not going to mention today called the groundwater protection targets. That's in the future, and that is going to come back to us working on township level adjustment of nitrogen applications based on the excess nitrogen. So this is an approach that was developed. You've seen it in your packets. It compares your parcel to everybody else that grows your crop. And what we're finding, again, you guys are doing a great job reporting this information, is that we're finding that we're pretty close to matching the application amount to the amount that the crop needs. There are some out there that some growers, some parcels that are getting too much fertilizer compared to the amount of yield. They're identified as outliers. And you can see that line on the far right. So they're almost applying 4 times more than that yield justified. So they're considered an outlier, and we're doing some other processes with the owners of those parcels. Talk about it in a second. So the crop nitrogen coefficient, real quick, is essentially how much nitrogen does it take to use almonds to make 1,000 pounds of nut meats. So they ground up trees, they ground up leaves and product and everything, and figured out it's roughly 68 pounds for 1,000 pounds of nut meats. So you throw an efficiency factor on that, and it's about 100 pounds for 1,000 pounds of nut meats. So we do a calculation. If you put on the amount the crop needs, that's 1. If you put on twice, that's 2. That means there's potential excess nitrate that will go past the root zone into the groundwater and contribute to groundwater contamination. So each of the crops, we figured out through these crop nitrogen coefficients, what are the good numbers that we should be using? Because what they're our bar. They are what we are being judged against as far as our performance in nitrogen applications versus the yield that we take off a field. The numbers we have are pretty stable. We found the major crops that UC has put a fair amount of work in to figure out: walnuts, almonds, pistachios. Those are our big acreage crops. About roughly what is an efficient amount of nitrogen to apply. So we're pretty good on those crops. You see some of the others on the right, they're still working on. Cherries, there's some new numbers that came out. Grain corn is, for some reason, a harder one to do as well. But anyway, these are the numbers you'll see in your report that will be used to compare your applications. So when we look at that applied versus removed, on that curve, the folks that have parcels out on that far right-hand side are labeled as an outlier. This is a technique that we had to use to the regional board and the activists who said, all right, what are you going to do with growers that show they're putting on too much nitrogen to meet the needs? So we have this identifier, this outlier designation, using those box and whisker plots. And our priority is finding the large acreage crops that have the most excess, having meetings and talking to them about approaches to minimize the amount of excess nitrogen. We started out with almonds in 2020, added grapes, pistachios, and walnuts in 22 or 21, sweet corn, potatoes, and tomatoes we added last year. This year, figs and alfalfa. So all of these crops from this year, figs and alfalfa, to the top, we're starting and we'll continue to have outlier parcel meetings with growers. And those of you that got that in your mail, you'll be getting an announcement for some meetings in March and April where we will be talking in more detail about that approach. So if you do have an outlier parcel, your plan, your nitrogen management plan needs to be signed off by a CCA. If you're self-certified, you're going to need to do additional classes. You have to attend this meeting and then complete what's called a management practice implementation report. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. But the bottom line is over 5 years, try to figure out a way to get more yield or apply less nitrogen to get out of that outlier designation. And so with the crops that have been reporting, they're doing pretty good. The first crops that we did were pretty good response, you see on green, but it's starting to lag in the more recent years. And I just encourage you, if you have been notified to be an outlier, please don't make us have to turn your name into the water board, because that's kind of the last step. We're not having to do that yet. We don't want to have to do that yet, but we can't go for 5, 6, 7 years without, or even less, having you not respond. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute, introduce Melissa Turner. She's going to give you an update on the groundwater and surface water program.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Turner with MLJ Environmental. I've been working with Perry and the East San Joaquin Coalition since 2004. We've had a lot of changes over the last 15, 20 years that have affected your regulations, your monitoring. As MLJ Environmental, we do handle your technical compliance, and so we do both the surface and the groundwater monitoring for you. So I just have a couple slides to update you from this last water year and the last year that we've been doing monitoring. So jumping right in with our groundwater monitoring program, this is hard to see. Essentially, the rationale behind the groundwater monitoring program in the East San Joaquin is to evaluate the impact of agriculture on your aquifers. So we came up with a network we've been monitoring for 3 years now. This upcoming year in 2023 will be the 4th year that we've been doing this network. The network is distributed across your coalition region, and it includes now 37 wells. Those 37 wells, some are member wells, some are publicly owned, and then others are monitoring wells that Sigma is also using. So we're collaborating with your efforts in the Sigma program to try to keep your costs down. They can use the nitrate results, and so can you for your compliance with the Irrigated Lands program. Our main rationale, again, is to have this network that covers a variety of commodities. So we want a spatial distribution, and it also is to look at the contributing effects of different recharge sources of groundwater. So to show you your well network, this is the same as last year. So if you're in the grower meetings last year, this should look very similar. You can see the pink dots are the observation wells, or the monitoring wells used for Sigma. The yellow are our other network there's somewhat shallow aquifer wells that we're looking at, again, the impact of recharge on the aquifer and mostly nitrates. We do sample for other constituents every 5 years, but its majority of it is focused on nitrate and nitrate contamination. Here are our results for nitrate from 2022. The bigger the dot and the redder it is, the higher the concentration. This hasn't changed much in the last couple of years. We've kind of had a similar trend where it's staying somewhat constant. The longer we do the monitoring, the more information we're going to have. But this was the results from this year, and you can see the kind of higher concentrations in the northern part of the coalition region, and then you have the smaller dots. And if it is a domestic well, a well that's used for drinking water, you would have, and if it's one of your wells, those owners are notified if they're above nitrate, because as Perry was talking about, the concern is nitrate in drinking water. So we do have a responsibility to make sure that people who are using that water know about any nitrate that is above 10 milligrams per liter. I wanted to add, too, about the East San Joaquin. You're a participant in what's called the Central Valley Groundwater Monitoring Collaborative. So as I'm sure you're well aware of, it makes sense when you look to the right and you look at this whole valley and all of the different subbasins, the aquifers don't just stop in your coalition boundary. And because the Irrigated Lands program covers the whole Central Valley, 10 of the 13 coalitions came together and decided to start reporting and consolidating their data together to look at trends over a larger region. So the East San Joaquin is that yellow up in the upper right. The rest is the CVGMC, the Central Valley Groundwater Monitoring Collaborative. So now we just did a 5-year trend analysis and report as part of the CVGMC. It's looking at all of the groundwater, the entire subbasins included in this area. It's able to give more of a representative understanding of what's happening in groundwater, especially in the last 5 years, which is about where these trend analyses are coming in on frequency. And then if you look to the left, that's the entire network of the CVGMC. So instead of the 37 wells in just the East San Joaquin Coalition, it's a report that covers 267 wells for the entire CVGMC area. So the CVGMC, if you do want to learn more, there's a website. The coalitions that are a part of the CVGMC are listed to the right. And again, one of the main reasons for it is the ILRP compliance, but also there's an understanding that Perry was talking about CV salts and Sigma. You have all these other entities that are also looking at groundwater quality. So now it's the idea that if you're already collecting this data, how can it be used for other regulatory compliance purposes, reduce cost, be more efficient? That's a big part of where this CVGMC concept has come in, especially with CV salts and other assessments of ambient and trend monitoring that needs to happen as required by the regional board. All right, so moving on to surface water. This is just a real quick summary. Things haven't changed in the last couple of years in our surface water monitoring, but in case you forgot or I needed a little reminder, we do monitor every month. That does include, in the storm season, we try to capture at least 2 stormwater samples to look at discharges from storm, and then also the rest of the year, mostly focused on irrigation return flows. And then we monitor for pesticides. That is a big part of our program. We do have a few other constituents. I have a slide later I'll show you. But with our pesticides, what we've changed in the last 4 or 5 years is that we're now monitoring based on use and environmental risk. And that actually is helping keep some of your costs down and also keep you in compliance with the ILRP. The importance of that is now we're looking at use in the last 3 years and also risks. So if it's something that's held to sediment, not likely to end up in surface water, we don't have the same sort of requirement to have to go out because it's less likely to be there. So a lot of the work that goes into the assessment of what we monitor for pesticides is based on those factors. We have 6 zones. The next slide I'll show you a picture, but the 6 zones then have been designed in your region to allow for some cost savings of monitoring. That again, we don't have to monitor everything everywhere. We're trying to be cost effective with this idea of a zone, which is developed based on commodity, climate, and soils to try to get a comparative understanding of an area where then we can do a core and represented monitoring design. With our core sites, that's where we monitor everything, and if we have a water quality issue, then we go to the represented sites and we start doing more monitoring in more areas. So again, trying to only monitor where we have a high risk, where we think there's going to be a problem and or known problem. Then the last thing is the management plan monitoring I wanted to bring up as well. And that's where if we have a known problem, which is triggered by more than one exceedance, which is a concentration above a limit, if it have more than one exceedance in a 3-year period, you automatically have to do a management plan. We've developed a comprehensive management plan in the coalition that covers all of your constituents. This gets into where in the past, chlorpyrifos is a good example where we've had chlorpyrifos issues. We had a management plan. We work with growers in terms of getting practices implemented. We continue to monitor. We show improvements, then we get out of it. So what this allows, again, is for the control to stay with the growers, the coalition, and there's less repercussions because we're able to demonstrate that practices are effective. And this is going to come into play because this last year we started getting different kinds of exceedances in the last 2 years with pyrethroids, which I have a couple of slides to show you. So this is your map, the zones and your corn represented. This should look very familiar. It's in your annual grower report as well if you want to spend a little time looking at it. And then in terms of what we monitor, just quickly reminder, field parameters such as DO, salts, which is electrical conductivity. We do measure flow. And then we have nutrients, metals, bacteria. These are all required in your order by the regional board. Our pesticides, as I mentioned, that is based on use and then environmental risk. And the last thing is we do have toxicity in the both water column and then also in your sediment. So we take water samples, it goes to a lab, we test for an invertebrate, the water flea, and then also algae to see if there's any impact of what's in the water on survival for the water flea and then growth for the algae. And then we also have an amphipod, which is called Hyalella. It's both, we do a test both in the surface water and the sediment. It's an organism that goes kind of right between the surface between the two. So we monitor twice a year for sediment to look at any toxicity in the sediment, and then the surface water is based on pyrethroids, which the Hyalella is very sensitive to. So that kind of brings me to the pesticides that we found in your water year 2022. So our water year starts in October and it ends in September the following year. And we do change our monitoring based on what I was talking about, the pesticides and looking at past use. We do change what is monitored each year based on that. But last year, what we found were pyrethroids. There's 6 listed here. You can see on the left is the name of the active ingredient. So that's what we would find and test for in the water. To the right is the product. So that kind of makes more sense of what you might be more used to, which is the product, how it relates to what we find in the water column. And then we also had some herbicides, including glyphosate, oxyflurfin, and simazine, and then one fungicide. So all of these have been detected in the last 12 months of your water year of October through September. Pyrethroids. So this is where now we're getting more and more detections and exceedances of the pyrethroids. The pyrethroids came into more of your monitoring program with what we call a basin plan amendment. The basin plan is what overall the regional board and state board look at the waterways in an entire region, the basin, the San Joaquin Valley Basin, and within that they have limits and requirements that then various regulatory programs have to be in compliance with. ILRP fits underneath that, and with the pyrethroids, we then had to do monitoring for these 6 pyrethroids, which are listed to the right. And because they're what we call additive, so they act in very much the same way. So you could have bifenthrin in the water, like detected in the water column. It will then compound any toxicity if you also had another or like S-valerate in the water column as well. So when we look at the concentrations, we have to look at all 6, and we have to look at their additive potential. And that's what we call the CGU, the concentration goal unit. And so by looking at the concentration relative to a limit, an exceedance value, if you add them all up to these ratios, you add them all up and they're above 1, that means that there's basically an impact of pyrethroids to organisms in the water column. And that's what we call toxicity. So I wanted to show you a graph which we started doing the 6 pyrethroids in the 2020 water year. And you can see, like I mentioned, that corn represented, we started at the core sites, and we wanted to see if there was any issue to be worried about. Well, what we found was, I'll have to look at the percent, that there was about 41% of our sites that exceeded that trigger limit that we were talking about. Then in the next year, because we saw some issues, we had to expand our monitoring, went to more sites, and we got more exceedances. So now we were at 52% of our sites having exceedances, and then you look in this last year in 2022, and we have 58% of our sites that are now in management plans. So you can see that it's going up. Our monitoring has had to increase because we've seen more problems, but we're also, with these management plans, now the coalition is reaching out to growers and working with management practices to track changes, and we're hoping we can get these exceedances down. So here's a few graphs to show by year. You can kind of see, again, we had less sites. Across the bottom is the month, so December, July, August, September, which is when we monitored based on past use. And then you can see that red line is the trigger limit, that CGU of 1. Anything above it is an exceedance. So we had 9 sites, we had 11 exceedances, and that ended up with 5 management plans. And then the next year, more sites, higher concentrations, so you can see those bars are higher above that red line, and now we kept adding additional management plans, 7 new management plans from there, and then this last year, it's gotten more sites again, more exceedances. You see it more in more months across that bottom axis. So I think what we want to just make sure that you guys are aware that it is an area that with the management plan process, the coalition is going to be reaching out to growers in those sub-watershed areas. Some of you may have already been reached out to, filling out surveys about your practices. That helps us relate it back to the regional board on a kind of a broad sub-watershed level, that number of acres that are associated with good management practices to reduce spray drift, to reduce runoff of pyrethroids. And here's another visual way to see the maximum concentration we detected in the 2022 water year. You can kind of see, again, those zones we were talking about earlier from north to south. And I think this exact map is also in your annual grower report. And this is a zoomed in area for this region of the northern part of the coalition region.
We've got a serious issue going on with pyrethroids. You all were here, many of you here, 20 years ago. You remember diazinon and chlorpyrifos, Lorsban, where we were having issues with it all over the place. We fixed it. I know growers did an outstanding job fixing the problem. And she kind of rushed over the names. I know it's hard to see it in the back, but let me read you the names that are on the bottle. Capture Brigade for pyrethroids. Capture Brigade, Tempo, Asana, Warrior, Karate, Saber, Mustang, Pounce. Those are pyrethroids. There's a lot of other names for it. We use them right now because they're cheap. Nobody's making money now, so we're doing this the cheapest we can to control, especially navel orange worm and codling moth. But we gotta figure out a way to get these things out of the water. I mean, seriously, when we have that many exceedances, if we keep that up in 5 years, I don't even want to forecast what's going to happen. So I'm going to start. We talked about this 15 years ago. Nothing has changed. There's only 3 ways they get into the water when you think about it. You got it on your back of your truck. You put it in the tank. It's getting in the water somehow. 3 ways primarily: irrigation runoff, which we almost don't have anymore compared to 20 years ago. I mean, there's hardly any drainage because, everybody we had tight water and they all got drip and micro. And then there's stormwater runoff. That's still a really tough one to control, but our exceedances tend to be in the irrigation season. So we got irrigation runoff, storm runoff, and spray drift. And I think spray drift is where these products are coming from. And the reason I say that is, I mentioned, we don't have irrigation runoff anymore because there's no more corn and alfalfa and row crops. We all have almonds and walnuts that are on micros and they're on drip systems. So there's not much, if any, runoff anymore. So what else could it be? And we've come to the conclusion, it's spray drift. And these numbers that Melissa was talking about are incredibly small. But when you add up all these pyrethroids into one, they add up to killing the bugs that are in the water. To be perfectly frank on what's going on. Who cares about the bugs in the water? Well, that's what the water board is there for, is they're regulating discharges of waste into surface water. So there's a practice that another group that I'm affiliated with, their acronym is CURES. We started studying the inward-only spraying of trees to try to find a way to not get this drift in. We did some studies that found out if you spray inward only on the outside 2 rows, you leave a lot of bugs on the tree, frankly. And we found out in navel orange worm in particular, you gotta spray both sides or you're not gonna control those pests on those outside 2 rows. So we came up with a technique that shows extremely good promise. The hard part of it is you need 2 spray rigs. But essentially what you're doing is you have an outside sprayer going parallel with the inside sprayer, blowing air in. And it blows the majority of that drift back into the field. And we've got thousands of dollars of data that shows that this is better than just doing the traditional method. So then as we were working on this practice, we came up with the idea, because we still were getting some drift coming out of the outside of the orchard, is to put a shield or a shroud over the outside sprayer that's blowing air. Because you cause turbulence with that, even with the nozzles off, you're still gonna get some slobber, I call it, coming out of the outside of your sprayer. So we came up with this technique where it's real simple. You put a plastic shield over the outside of the sprayer, put it on with zip ties, and on your outside 2 rows, put that thing on and spray either with just your 1 sprayer or with your 2 sprayers, 1 blowing air. So we did some tests with this, and that's a 300 horsepower Durand Whalen sprayer. There was a tree going by that sprayer. There's a YouTube video on there that shows there's a little tree next to it. When that sprayer went by, it didn't even rustle the leaves, because that completely blocks that air that's going out of that outside of the sprayer. There's a spray rig on the outside of our area over here. It has one on there. I just put it on there for demonstration purposes, but it's a piece of plastic, and you zip tie it on, you cut it, you put it on for one row, you take it off. I went to a grower meeting last week, and I was telling folks about this, and had a guy stand up, this grower in a PCA. He said, I built one of those 20 years ago out of metal. I put it on the outside of my sprayer because I've got houses all the way around my orchard. And he said, I put that thing on, and the people in those houses, they don't even know I'm spraying other than they can hear it, because I used to get spray on their yard and all that, and they get all mad at me. He said, I've been doing it for 20 years. I said, let me take a picture. And he said, no way, you're not, it's so rusty and ugly, but it does the same thing as this. So I'm offering a big deal today. If you see that and you think you can do it and you got a waterway, let the ladies know at the front desk, and we'll get you a shroud. We'll just deliver it to you, because seriously, we have got to figure out a way to solve this, or we're not going to have pyrethroids. I think that the reevaluation that's going on with DPR and EPA right now with pyrethroids in water, this is not good news, good data for them to have in that evaluation. All right, so there's a brochure back there too that the other organization made. They've got a website there. You can see that video of that sprayer. Hand it over to Katie. She's going to talk about a few more things for you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Katie. I'm with the Stanislaus County Farm Bureau and also a grower rep here in the East San Joaquin, specifically in Stanislaus County, but we cover all three. You should have gotten your member packet. It's the brightly colored folder that went out in November. Then you probably got a little update reminder letting you know that you should have gotten your packet. So if you haven't, see us up front. We can email one over to you so you get it right away. This is all due March 1st. So your member dues and your nitrogen plan are due back to us on March 1st. You want to make sure you get those in on time. Perry talked a little bit about some of the late fees that are coming out this year. But get that in on time. If you need any help, you have any questions, give us a call. Member assistance, these are the numbers to give a call here. The Stanislaus County Farm Bureau, you can always call the 209-846-6112, extension 2. Also, Merced and Madera County Farm Bureaus both have people that can help you complete your report. So wherever you're at, we can help you. I think Melissa's going to come up a little bit, but we've got some tools on our member portal that you can utilize. So this is our worksheet. You can do your entire nitrogen management plan worksheet online and input your data throughout the year as you apply nitrogen. It'll kind of keep an aggregate of that, and you can have it automatically fill your summary report. So it's a handy feature and tool. If you want to use that, you can go ahead, utilize that worksheet, and it will fill in your summary report for you. The web portal is open all the time, so you can go onto the website, log into your member portal, complete all of your requirements, update any parcels, see your parcel maps, do your nitrogen plan. The video is on there, so if you ever weren't able to attend a member meeting, you can watch it right on the member portal. A very handy feature. We're super glad we have it. It can be done at any time. So everything is still due on March 1st, but you can utilize the portal and you don't have to mail anything back in. A couple things coming up. We are not hosting these in person anymore, but we do have irrigation and nitrogen management plan self-certifications available at any time. I think this next site has it here. This website, if you go to the CDFA training site, you can go on. There's a self-study course. This will allow you to sign off on your own irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report. It's really handy. The new class is kind of a self-study class, so you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it from home. It takes, I think it says 2 to 3 hours now on the new class that's online. You can find it there. And if you already have your self-certification, you need 1 hour per year or 3 hours over 3 years of continuing education. They have a ton of courses available both in person and online that you can watch anytime. So you can check that bottom website out at the continuing education tab. So I'll leave this up for a second because I see some people taking pictures. Everyone good? We also have these linked on our website. So if you go to our website and click on the irrigation and nitrogen management tab, these are both linked in there so you can get there easily. Self-certification for sediment erosion. This is one time. If you've gone through the course, you just want to you're good. You don't have to go back through another one. If you're looking for a new course, we do have one coming up in April. It is posted on our website. We're going to host one in Merced this year. So if you would like to get your self-certification for your sediment and erosion control plan, if you require one, check our website. We do have a course coming up in April. Again, the irrigation nitrogen management plan is due on March 1st. There is going to be a $50 late fee for any late plans. Come see us, give us a call, let us know how we can help. You want to make sure this is complete. And that's the summary report. This is kind of a long-standing requirement, so most of you probably already have this, but anybody who needs a copy of the waste discharge orders, we can print those at the office, or you can download them from our website. So it is on the website. You don't have to have a physical copy, you just have to have one that you've saved on your computer, or you know how to access it easily. So if you do need a copy, you'd like it, give us a call. It's like 300 pages, so it takes us a while to print, but we'll print it ahead of time and have it ready for you. We did have some new seated board members in 2022. So Patrick Machado, John Mendonça, and Dominic Rossini are all new to our board. And I think this next slide shows all of our board members. We have a really fantastic board. It's made up of growers and PCAs and people in the ag community that work really hard to keep dues as low as possible for you. So if you see any of these people, they're fantastic people and they work really hard. They come to a lot of meetings and do really good work to advocate for you. So if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to our board members. Feel free to reach out to us. And I think that is everything. Does anybody have any questions for us?
So we scheduled till 10:30, so I got 25 more minutes I can talk to you guys. So get comfortable. No, kidding. No, I had a gentleman come up to remind me that I didn't talk about the work that the regional board has done for non-members. And he made the statement that many have made before, my neighbor still mocks me for being in the irrigated lands program. Well, the regional board has actually been working on that. And in the last 5 years, we've added, I know we had that statistic in our last annual meeting, but we've added over 20,000 acres. There were some growers that got drug in kind of kicking and screaming, and along with a $60,000 fine. So they can keep kind of mocking at you, but if at some point those growers are all going to be in this coalition, the board has a policy that they pay back dues until from the day that we started. So just keep in mind that the regional board is still looking for these members that are not these growers that are not participating. One other thing that we didn't talk about is the domestic well sampling. That started four years ago now. There's some regional board staff that are going to be back at the table, sign-in table. If you've got any questions about your domestic well sampling that you did do or maybe got new property and haven't done yet. So we figured it was a mature program. We wouldn't talk much about it. But there will be staff back there to talk to you if you got any questions. So that's it. Appreciate you all coming today, and really take those donuts home. We don't have any place to put them. Thank you.